Welcome back to OpenLine. Dr. Katie Foss from MTSU is my guest tonight. We are talking about media, epidemics, pandemics, how it all intertwines tonight. She has written a new book called Constructing the Outbreak, which was written well before COVID-19, came out kind of right at the beginning of it, within the first couple of months. So I imagine that you had to watch this with your professor hat on in a different way than most of us experienced it.
And it's been such a personal experience, as it has for everybody, but to be experiencing it both as an expert in this area, especially, again, media's constructions of the pandemic as it was unfolding, at the same time also as a professor leading my students through online classes and a parent trying to juggle class Zooms with whatever I was doing at the moment. It's been an interesting 2 years.
It has, but tell me what you were particularly looking for of how this pandemic was handled and portrayed in the media since writing this book. You had this experience looking back, now you were sitting in it. What were you watching for?
Good question, and I would say, first of all, it's much more enjoyable to be looking back in the archives and just imagining what people went through, as opposed to, again, having such emotional responses and then trying to suppress some of those emotional responses to be more analytical in answering questions about what was going on and doing I did a lot of popular writing about what was going on. And what was I looking for? Well, I was trying to consume as much media content as I could across various outlets. So looking at how local news was covering it across platforms, of course, so TV news, and then looking at local radio, various local newspapers, looking at how campus newspapers were covering the pandemic as it was unfolding, and of course also national outlets across platforms and international outlets, as well as social media, looking at YouTube, just a little bit of TikTok because I'm old, but all these just individual voices and experiences as well. And it's been difficult to process, and I think we're still trying to process it as well.
I think we will be for a long time, and it will probably take someone like you, what, 10, 20 years from now, to look back at it without that experience role of living through it, to say, okay, really, objectively, how was this portrayed and handled, and make those connections. What patterns did you notice were consistent from other epidemics that you studied for your book?
So first of all, I would say a pattern is just the need for information and the public's need for information and the dependency on media outlets to provide information. You know, the surge in consumption of different news outlets, as well as, of course, entertainment venues like Netflix and streaming, which made sense. People turning to social media, and then, of course, in the past we didn't have social media, but just needing that connection to others and to connect with others to make sure not only that they're okay, but also kind of sharing in a solidarity, if you will. And then releasing information as much as we knew at the moment, but then looking back even a few months later and saying, well, we weren't quite right on that one, but that's what we knew. And I do think that's the important thing, regardless of looking at this moment versus or looking at past moments, is that you have to evaluate it within the time frame, from the perspective of what did we know at that point, instead of trying to judge it in an outdated way, because it really is not the same thing. And it's not even the same thing in terms of judging accuracy, because things change, especially as news, as you know, news is unfolding. We can't judge it for its moment.
Right. I think one of the things that I saw change or need, or I think viewers were frustrated with, is oftentimes when we report a story, it has happened, and we say, here is what happened. This was happening, and we had to leave that space for things to change, but people wanted that to be the truth always. You said it, it's done. And it's like, well, this is evolving. And so really the mindset had to change.
And I think consumers have a tough time understanding that if you're not a professor of journalism, of media studies, if you're not a reporter, if you haven't, they don't understand that what you're being presented with isn't going to be the whole story. It can't be the whole story until something's concluded. But at the same time, we need that information.
Yes.
So that it's evolving doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it's a product of that particular time.
In a lot of ways, it was like a breaking news story that was evolving for
All the
2
time.
years. For
Yes.
2 years, and people, you know, some people just wanted it to end. I think most people, but yeah, it was just like this is what we know today, and tomorrow may be completely different. Let's get to the phone lines. We have Johnny, who is waiting ever so patiently to be part of this conversation. Hi, Johnny. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate y'all taking my call.
Sure.
I think the problem is social media is kind of dictating what's getting out there as far as what's you can't say this and all that crap. My opinion is, if it's true or not, let it go. People ain't got the, I guess, common sense to make decisions of their own anymore to figure out what's right and what's wrong. But so we've got to have the government and social media, Facebook and all that, dictating what we hear. Because I've been on Facebook and I'd look at a goofy comment and all of a sudden it was fact checked. Oh, this ain't true. And it was just a joke, you know. I hate to say it, but social media is ruining this country. Thank y'all for the call. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you for calling in. You know,
have a good day.
He's going to open that Pandora's box for me of social media. Certainly something that we are seeing that we have never seen before during an epidemic. I'm just going to open that door and let you walk through it and tell us your observations of social media during this time.
Well, I think one thing that we have to clarify at first is that when we say social media, we're talking about a lot of different platforms, and we're also talking about channels, because social media itself is not an entity that's producing content.
True.
Right. It's a tunnel to get content out there in which anybody can then share and again reproduce the content. I also would like to distinguish between what the platforms do in terms of their own censorship, especially censoring misinformation, as opposed to like government censorship, which isn't happening on social media. That social media platforms are private corporations, so they get to decide the rules for the channels for sharing and reproducing information. And again, so that takes it from, you know, from a government point of view or a censorship point of view, and again puts it on not only the consumers, because if you don't like what's going on, people can choose not to use it. Just like if you don't like a store, you don't have to go in. And that's a little bit different, but especially when we're talking about something like a public health issue that's impacting so many people, having at least some checkpoints on what's being spread, and not a ton of checkpoints, but just even Twitter's flag where it says, you haven't read this article, are you sure you want to share it? Even those little checkpoints can help people at least acknowledge that maybe what they're reading might not always be, you know, facts on a plate, right?
I want to pick your brain a little bit when it comes to the spread of disinformation via media, particularly social media channels. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like it, what I've seen in the last, I would even say 4 years. I think so much of it is tied to political. Then we had the pandemic and everything kind of collided, and it just got really ugly and just so vast. Your thoughts?
I completely agree with you, and I think that we also have to factor in the pandemic, obviously, because we have to factor in the pandemic, right, to everything. But the pandemic, especially during the lockdown, so not only did we consume more media, including social media platforms, than ever before, we also had this moment in which we were not connected to our community. And the loss of interpersonal connection, the face-to-face connection in which you might not agree with the person sitting next to you, but you're probably not going to bring up the hot button issues if we're face-to-face. We interact differently if we're face-to-face versus feeling anonymous online. And I think that just fueled the fire. Our need for information, our lack of contact with others, combined with, again, the evolving stories and not knowing quite what's true, all came together in what we've been witnessing.
And it seems like we have all developed really bad habits when it comes to being a news consumer or a information consumer because of that.
And yet, so many people think they're experts on areas that they are not experts on, and a lack of trust of experts, especially when parts of stories get repeated without looking at the whole picture, without citing a whole story, or people start to rely too much on the facts that they're social media friends are sharing without going to the actual sources themselves. So there's a lack of digital literacy with a heightened level of consumption that's creating our misinformation issue.
Yeah, it's like one big cycle that we just keep going through, keep going through, keep going through. Okay, we have to take another quick break. I would love to have other folks join the conversation. 615-737+ is the number. We're coming right back.